Hey everyone, Anne here, and welcome back to The Difference, the place where you come to hear about the difference that Jesus makes in your life. So, here at the Chapel Online in 2022, we are reading through the Bible, and last week we started in the book of Job, and we will actually spend a full 2 weeks in the book of Job. So, we began with his story, and today I want to talk about the beginning of his story. And then next week, make sure that you come back because we're going to hear the rest of the story. So this will kind of be a two-part message over 2 weeks. So let's just talk about the book of Job. For those of you maybe who haven't been reading along with us, maybe you're unfamiliar with what is contained in the book of Job. And really, the book of Job is one of the oldest written biblical accounts that we have. And it is all about the problem of pain, addressing pain in the life of someone who is good, someone who's godly, someone who is living the way that they should. And a lot of us have issues with pain. A lot of us take issue with God when it comes to pain in our lives. And a lot of people actually use pain as an excuse not to believe in God. They ask questions like, why do bad things happen to good people? And why does God allow suffering? And so many people have a hard time understanding how come a good God who loves us would allow us to go through difficulty and pain and hardship and struggle. And that's exactly what the book of Job kind of outlines for us. And it gives us a good theology and an understanding of pain and the place that it holds in the life of a believer. And so today what we're going to do is dig in just to the first chapter of the book of Job. And like I said, if you haven't read this yet, go back and read it. The book of Job does not take long to read, but it really is a very interesting look at a man who had a problem with pain and suffering in his life. So we're going to go ahead and start in chapter 1, and we'll just read the whole chapter 1 here, and starting with verse 1. And I want you to listen to what we learn about Job in the first part of this chapter. It says this: There once was a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God and stayed away from evil. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 teams of oxen, and 500 female donkeys. He also had many servants. He was, in fact, the richest person in that entire area. Job's sons would take turns preparing feasts in their homes, and they would also invite their 3 sisters to celebrate with them. When these celebrations ended, sometimes after several days, Job would purify his children. He would get up early in the morning and offer a burnt offering for each of them. For Job said to himself, "Perhaps my children have sinned and have cursed God in their hearts." This was Job's regular practice. So what is it that you heard about Job in that first passage? These were some of the things that were revealed about his character and his nature. It said that he was blameless, which doesn't mean perfect or without sin. It just meant that he lived a blameless, a holy life that really honored God in all that he did. He was a man of integrity. He feared God. He avoided evil. He was successful. He was influential. He was a good father. He provided for his family and he led them spiritually, and he was a worshiper. We learn all of that about Job, and we learn and we see how blessed Job was. He really was living a good life, a life that was focused on God, and God blessed him for his focus and his worship. So now we pick up in chapter 1 with verse 6, where we begin to see that there is a conversation happening that no one else is privy to. Okay, so it starts this way in verse 6. One day, the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser, Satan, came with them. "Where have you come from?" the Lord asked Satan. Satan answered the Lord, "I have been patrolling the earth, watching everything that's going on." Then the Lord asked Satan, "Have you noticed my servant Job? He is the finest man in all the earth. He is blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God and stays away from evil." So we see that there is this heavenly conversation that is taking place between God and Satan, who is called the accuser. And Satan comes to God and God says, "Hey, where have you been? What have you been doing?" And Satan basically says, "Hey, I've been patrolling the earth. I've been watching the things that are happening." And it's a good reminder for us that we have a very real enemy, and that he is watching what is happening in the world. He's watching the things that we're doing and the way that we live our lives. And as I was reading this, I began to wonder, okay, what does God say about you and to me, to the enemy? Does he say to the enemy, "Hey, have you seen my servant Anne?" Or "Have you seen this servant who is following my commands, who is living a blameless life, who is living a life full of integrity? Have you seen my servant?" He certainly pointed out Job because as a father, he was so proud and so delighted by Job's behavior and his motivation and just his love and respect. And so now we continue on with this conversation. In verse 9 of chapter 1, it says this: Satan replied to the Lord, "Yes, but Job has a good reason to fear God. You have always put a wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You have made him prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." "All right, you may test him," the Lord said to Satan. "Do whatever you want with anything he possesses, but don't harm him physically." So Satan left the Lord's presence. So Satan was basically saying, of course Job is upright and righteous because you have blessed him with all of these things. Take away all the material possessions and Job will lose his faith. And so God says, sure, go ahead and test him and see if that's true. And so Satan left God's presence, and this is what happens down where Job and his family are celebrating. In verse 13, it says this: "One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with this news: 'Your oxen were plowing with the donkeys feeding beside them when the Sabaeans raided us. They stole all the animals and killed all the farm hands. I am the only one who escaped to tell you.'" Okay, so all of a sudden we're introduced to this huge big loss that happened to Job. The oxen, the donkeys, they stole all the animals, killed all of the farm hands. I mean, these would be Job's friends, his workers. And so this one person escaped to tell the story. And then in verse 16, it goes on, while he was still speaking. So it wasn't even finished. Another messenger arrived with this news: "The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burned up your sheep and all the shepherds. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." So now he's missing his livestock, and all of a sudden the sheep and the shepherds are completely destroyed. And while he was still speaking, a third one came up. A third messenger arrived with this news: "3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels and killed your servants. I am the only one who escaped to tell you." And so now it's the camels and more of his servants. And while he was still speaking, a fourth messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters were feasting in their oldest brother's home. Suddenly, a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness and hit the house on all sides. The house collapsed, and all your children are dead. I am the only one who escaped to tell you. So remember that we said Job was this influential man who just had been blessed beyond measure. He had riches, he had livestock, he had wealth. He was a worshiper, he loved his family. And all of a sudden we see that Job has a serious problem with pain. All of a sudden we begin to see he's lost his livelihood, his property, his friends, his family, his comfort, his influence. Job has lost just about everything except for his life. That's all that he has left. Can you imagine the sense of loss that he would feel in that moment? Can you imagine the anger that he might have felt in that moment? I know for sure I would have felt disappointed. I would have felt angry. I would have felt betrayed. I would have been questioning, God, why did this happen? What did I do to deserve this? How can this be your will? And so we read in verse 20 of chapter 1 how Job responds to this problem of suffering. It says this in chapter 1, Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. Then he shaved his head and fell to the ground to worship. He said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I will be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. Friends, I wish I could say that that is how I respond to this level of suffering and pain in my life. I think Job has something to teach us. How in the world, when he was faced with this much suffering, with this much anguish and grief, could he then worship? Even as he was mourning, he was worshiping, and he fell to the ground and he began to sing praises to God in the midst of this. And I think that this verse is so significant. In all of this, Job did not sin by blaming God. Job didn't say, God, it's your fault this happened. God, why would you do this to me? He never once blamed God. All he did was worship. And we know that in chapter 2, Satan and God have another conversation, and God says, hey, look, Job, he's still upright. He's still righteous. He's still a man of integrity. And Satan comes back and says, yeah, but if you harm his life, if you take his health away, then he's sure to sin, and he's sure to abandon his faith. And so God gives Satan permission to do that, and he breaks out with boils all over his skin. And his wife is saying, would you just curse God and die? And Job responds, you talk like a foolish woman. Should we accept only good things from the hand of God and never anything bad? So in all of this, Job said nothing wrong. Friends, I think that's pretty significant. And I think that many of us, most of us, can probably say that we don't respond to pain and suffering like Job did. And so as I began to think about that, I began to wonder, okay, why is that? Why is it that we often respond with blaming God or blaming other people or anger and bitterness and stuffing it all down until it explodes? And I think it's because we have a different mindset of pain than Job did. So let's look at this mindset shift that we can make as believers in order to have a better view of the problem of pain. So as we look at just the average mindset that we see in the world, we often see a mindset of comfort is priority. That the whole reason we exist on this earth is to be comfortable, and we do everything that we possibly can to keep ourselves in a place of comfort. That anything that hurts us, anything that harms us, anything that challenges us or causes pain is bad. And anything that keeps us comfortable and keeps us happy is good. Pain is bad, comfort is good. And there's another part of this mindset that blessing is happiness. That when God is blessing me, I know that because I'm happy. So anytime I am happy in my life, that is God's blessing to me. That God's blessing could not be suffering or pain. That God's blessing must be my comfort and my happiness. And another part of that mindset is this, that my behavior can almost control God's actions toward me. I mean, we don't really say it in that way, but we think, okay, if I am good, then God will bless me and He will give me what I want and make me happy. He will keep me comfortable as long as I control my behavior. By controlling my behavior, I control what God does. Friends, all of these mindsets are so ingrained within our thinking that we often don't even recognize it. And it's become a part of how we see the problem of pain in our lives. But if we look at Job's example, I think Job had a different mindset about pain. So let's contrast the two and see what we can learn. So Job, he knew that holiness is priority. Friends, just because something is painful, just because something is difficult or uncomfortable, doesn't mean that it's wrong. Sometimes we need to pursue holiness. All the time we need to pursue holiness, and sometimes that holiness is only brought about through pain and suffering. Comfort is no longer our priority. Holiness needs to be our priority. And if we can become more like Jesus through seasons of comfort, great. But more often than not, we actually become more like Jesus through periods of pain and suffering and difficulty in our lives. So we need to flip our mindset and realize that holiness actually needs to be our priority instead of comfort. And then when we look at blessing, the blessing of God is His presence. It's not our happiness. So we know that God is blessing us when we experience His presence and He is near. Friends, I don't know about you, but in times of pain and trouble in my life, I have experienced a greater presence and an intimacy with God than I ever would in seasons of comfort and seasons of what we call happiness or joy. And sometimes we need to realize that God's blessing is His presence even in the midst of pain. That pain can actually be a blessing because we get to experience God more fully and get to know Him more intimately. And then finally, we need to realize that our behavior is not to control God, but our behavior needs to be so that we can love other people more fully. So we don't do good just so God will do good to us and keep us comfortable. We do good because we love other people. We do good in the world because it is a response to the love that we have received from God that we long to give to other people to experience. If we begin to adjust our mindset in how we see pain, We won't try to avoid pain. We won't try to think that God is punishing us for something. We won't tend to think that we are to blame for this pain. We might be able to see that pain is an opportunity to pursue holiness, to feel the blessing of His presence, and then using that to love others more fully. Friends, there are a couple of things that I think about when it comes to pain and this process of sanctification and becoming more like Jesus. And it's these two things. God cares more about your character than your comfort. And He cares more about your holiness than your happiness. So friends, where have you experienced loss? What have you lost? Who have you lost? When have you suffered and how have you suffered? I want you to know that there is a purpose in the pain, that there is actually an opportunity in the pain, that as we journey through the book of Job, we will see that Job counted his suffering as a benefit. He actually comes out of all of this suffering that he has experienced a richer believer in God and with a deeper faith in the Father. And so, friends, today, no matter where you are in your suffering, know that it has a purpose. Don't waste a good crisis. Don't let pain go by or just try to hide or avoid it. Press into the pain and allow that pain to draw you deeper into the Father. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I know that there are so many people that are suffering, so many people that are in difficult places today. God, I just acknowledge that pain and difficulty and suffering, they're hurtful and they're hard. But just because something is hard doesn't mean that it's not good for us. Father, I just ask that you will meet each and every one of us at the point of our pain. Father, that you will minister to our hearts and our minds, that we will experience your presence more fully and completely. God, I just ask that you will guide us through these periods of difficulty and help us to become more like you. In your name I pray, amen.
In the quiet, oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, I know that you are good. Oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, I know that you are good. You are there. I know you're there. You are there. I know you're there. In the quiet. Oh, in the quiet. Oh, in the quiet. In the quiet, I know that you are there. Oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, I know that you are good. You are there. Oh, I know you're there. You are there. Oh, you're there. You are there. Oh, I know you're there. You are there. teach us how to follow. Teach us, teach us, teach us how to follow. Teach us, teach us, teach us how to follow you. Oh, sing in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, I know that you are good. Oh, in the quiet, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, I know that you are there. You are there. I know you're there. You are there. I know you're there. Oh, you are there. I know you're there. You are there. I know you're there. In the quiet, oh, in the quiet, teach us, teach us, teach us how to follow. Teach us, teach us, oh, teach us how to follow you. Oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, in the quiet, I know that you are good. Oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, oh, in the quiet, I know that you are good.
So friends, today we heard a hard lesson from Job about the problem of pain in our lives. And I hope that you have begun to shift your mindset and begin to see pain from a different point of view. Begin to find the potential in the pain and begin to see God walking with you through it. And friends, don't forget that we are continuing to read through the book of Job. So even if you haven't read from chapter 1, go ahead and go back and start at chapter 1 and read with us, because next week we're going to come back and see what happens in the rest of Job's story and how he grows in his relationship with God through this period of pain. Friends, I hope that this has been a blessing to your soul. And if you are in a period of pain and you want to receive some prayer, please reach out to me over Messenger. Make sure that you are not traveling this period of pain alone. You have a great community that is here to support you at the Chapel Online, and we want to join you in praying for your season of difficulty, that God will be able to maximize your pain so that you can become more like Jesus for the sake of others. We'll see you back next week.